Continuing on our series regarding meeting the Messiah, we come to one of the most well-known chapters and perhaps one of the most encouraging chapters for the Christian in all of the New Testament and all of the Bible, in fact, and that is the healing of the man born blind in Jerusalem. It's likely happened in Jerusalem. Now, since this occurs in chapter 9, we remember the account of the Samaritan woman. We remember the paralyzed man being healed in our account last week. Well, before chapter 9, much takes place. Okay, there's the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus walks on the water. He has a huge dispute with the Pharisees. Disciples leave him, and he asks his apostles, "Are you wanting to leave as well?" And Peter says, "Who would I go? Who would we go to? You have the words of eternal life." And they are given blessings. And then, just before chapter 9, is when he gives that profound answer to the Jews. Before Abraham was, I am. And just after that, he says, then they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. So this is one of those accounts where Jesus somewhat disappears, mysteriously just disappears, and reemerges with this blind man. So beginning chapter 9. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. This man was born blind. He was born blind. This blindness didn't occur later by some tragic accident. This man was born blind, which makes the account of Christ's healing all the more miraculous, all the more necessarily powerful. One would surmise that perhaps if somebody lost their sight through some sort of accident, that maybe through some medical way, some medical but yet mysterious, unknown in that day, in that time, could have done and restored his sight. This man is born blind, and he will say that later. When has a man who has been born blind, when has such a man been healed? When he speaks to the Pharisees. Now, we are not going to be able to address all of this in one message, so this is going to be one of at least two, God willing. We can at least keep them within two. We can spend much time with this chapter, but I think this chapter, I think this story, this account ought to be very uplifting, very encouraging, and awe-inspiring for the Christian. Okay, so he comes, and there's this man born blind. On to verse 2. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, since we've begun looking at the book of Job, we know about this retribution theology and how it is indeed biblical. Now, in this specific time, this was very well pronounced. This is very well popular. So essentially, whenever anybody was suffering a malady, any kind of suffering whatsoever, this had to be on account of somebody's sin. And the Jews in this day actually believed that a child can sin in the womb. Okay, so his disciples are asking a legitimate theological question here. So let's not castigate his disciples. However, they are not really beyond that of Job's friends. Their theological positions are not far surpassing Job's friends. They're exactly where Job's friends are. Essentially, this man was born blind. Okay? Why has God caused this? Is it because his parents sinned, or is it because he sinned? Now, to set this whole thing up, again, this man was born blind. His parents obviously knew he was born blind, and it had to cause them strife. It had to cause him strife. There had to be many days throughout his life when they're asking the question, why? Why? Especially the parents. Why is he born blind? Why is he suffering? Is this on account of my sin, my God? And if it is, why have you laid this upon my son? Please, God. Please, God. Suffering, hurting on account of their son. This man constantly wondering what it's like to see. He's never seen light. He's never seen his parents. He's never seen the temple. He's never seen the Ark of the Covenant. He's never seen a sacrifice. He's never seen the city of David. He's never seen Mount Zion. He's never seen anything. The light has not dawned one time in his life. And he's going through this his entire life, both he and his parents. So, Rabbi, who sinned? Was it he or his parents that he was born blind? And Jesus answers, no, neither. Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. So he says no. It was neither he nor his parents. The reason this man was born blind was so that the works of God might be done in his life. Now, before this, Christ is asked, what is the work of God? What must we do to be saved? Jesus says the work of God is this, to believe in his Son. To believe in his Son. So, this man was born blind so that belief in his Son might be manifest. Not only will this man be given sight, just as he gives sight to all who are redeemed in him. Again, this is a picture of all we who are born blind. We are all born blind. We are all born lame and helpless. We are all born in a state of sin, just as the Samaritan woman. This is all a reflection of us. We are all born blind until the light of the world comes and gives us eyes to see and ears to hear. So he says, neither he nor his parents sinned. This was done. God ordained this to come to pass for this specific moment, and that this might reverberate throughout the generations. Many hymns, the most obvious one is Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, who saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, and now I'm found. That's the prodigal son or the running father. Was blind, but now I see. All we, like sheep, go astray and wander in our own way, blind to the good shepherd, until he comes and lays his hands upon us. He goes on, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. Now, again, because we cannot go into this too much detail, as time will not permit. So essentially, he's saying, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Essentially, what he's talking about is his incarnation. While he is present in the world, it is the day, okay? He's not saying once he departs and the Spirit comes, it is still night. But he's anticipating the night of his death. The nights, the days and the nights while he's in the tomb. The day is, and I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. When no one can work. While I am in the tomb, this is a time of grief, and no one's working. No one's doing anything while I'm in the tomb. When he had said these things, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Again, Jesus Christ is the light of the world. He is the light who gives sight to the blind. He is the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. Okay. Much conjecture is surmised with this verse, and so I am going to spare you much of the details. Let me just give two main points here. Okay, one of the works that the rabbis were saying was a sin at this time during the Sabbath. This, again, occurs on the Sabbath, and we will address that very briefly. However, on the Sabbath is kneading. K-N-E-A-D, not N-E-E-D. So kneading dough, okay? So essentially, when he spat on the ground and made clay, this is something of a kneading, okay? So this is likely the sin of the traditional law that the rabbis had come up with at that time. The most important thing, I think, though, and I don't see this in many commentaries, but I don't see how this is missed. He uses the earth. He uses the earth and his own spittle, but the earth to give sight to this blind man. Just as God, from the dust, made man, he's making a new man of this man. He's not only given him true eyesight for the first time, He's given him life. Remember, he did not come to condemn. He came to save. He came to judge, and he will say that, and we'll make a point of that as time goes. But he uses the dust of the earth for the dust of this man to restore the sight that he never had, to give him the blessing of seeing him and seeing the glory of God in and through his Son. But he comes to this man. This man doesn't know what's going on. He's hearing his disciples ask this Rabbi, who sinned? He or his parents? And he's wondering, what's this rabbi going to say? Was it me? Who's at fault here? I've been wondering this too my whole life. Who's at fault here? And he's ecstatic. Neither. Okay, this is interesting. I never considered that. And all of a sudden, Jesus spits on the ground, makes some clay, puts it on his eyes. He's got to be thinking, what's going on here? What's going on here? And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Now, he went to this pool called Siloam, which is translated sent. The progression of salvation of this man. Christ comes to men and women in different ways. Once he confessed he was the Messiah to the Samaritan woman, she believed. Once he had that conversation with Nicodemus, he believed. The thief on the cross immediately believed. Many times, he will send men and women through a progression of salvation. This is definitely what happened to me. So, he hears, it was neither me nor my parents who caused this blindness. Is sin. Sin is the cause of all suffering. Read Genesis chapter 3. All suffering, all maladies, all handicaps, all sorts of evil and suffering in this world is a cause of sin, is an effect of sin. So he comes, puts this mud on his eye. This man finds his way to this pool on any kind of hope. He's hearing the testimony of this man, and he's starting to, his hope is starting to rise. His hope is beginning to rise. And so he goes to this pool and he washes. He obeys the name of Jesus. And we will see he still doesn't believe in this Jesus, okay? But he does go to the pool, which is called sent. And he comes back seeing. We have to pause when these little words seem to mean nothing. This man saw for the first time. He goes to this pool. He rinses his eyes out. And it must have been blurry at first. And he sees the trees. He sees the birds. He sees the light. He sees people. He sees water. Everything he's felt, everything he's heard, he now sees for the first time. And he comes back seeing. He returns in a completely different way than as Christ sent him. This is the testimony of every Christian. Go, wash, go be baptized. Come back, and you will be seeing upon your return. So it comes back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, "Is not this he who sat and begged?" Some said, "This is he." Others said, "He is like him." So everybody sees this man. He looks exactly like the man who was born blind, who's always begging. He's left to do this. He can't work. He can't do any sort of labor. So he's left to beg at the temple, as we saw the lame man in the book of Acts. And many people who are hopeless and helpless, just like the man in the previous account, in chapter 9. So they are wondering, is this he? And some are saying, this is he. Others said, he is like him. He looks like him. This must be somebody who looks very similar to this man. Until this man, just answers this dispute. I am he. I am he. Indeed, it is I. I was born blind, and now I see. Yes, neighbors, it is I. Let us rejoice. And they are very excited. So, therefore, they said to him, "How were your eyes open? How were your eyes open?" He answered and said, "A man called Jesus." This is all he is at this point. And let us remember that, because we're not going to be able to get to this whole chapter today, okay? But let us remember that. A man called Jesus. That's all I know about this guy. I just know his name. I don't know. I don't believe anything more about him. I just know, once I was blind, and now I see. And this man called Jesus healed me. A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, "Go to the pool of Siloam and wash." So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, "Where is he?" This is fantastic. This is amazing. Let's go talk to the man who healed you. We have some questions. We have some profound theological questions. This man has given sight to a man born blind. Who is this man? Where is he? That we might go speak to him. He said, "I don't know." Okay, so the next viable option is they brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees. There must be no accusation of malice on account of these neighbors. This is what you would do. This is what you would do. The religious authorities were the main function of the days at that time. These were the authorities. They have these questions. They can't find the man who healed them, so they're going to go to the religious authorities in whom they trust. These men know the law. When John talks about the Pharisees, in particular after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70, pretty much all of the scribes were Pharisees. In this time, most of the scribes are Pharisees. Scribes were very proficient with the law. They knew the law very well. Okay, they knew it very much anyway. They didn't know the ultimate meaning, and this is what Jesus continues to tell them. Remember in the last account, you seek the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life. But these are they which profess of me. Okay, so they're going to the Pharisees. They're going to the religious authorities of the day who should have answers regarding this, right? Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Okay, we're going to have to briefly, because we have discussed how when Jesus does these healings on the Sabbath, remember last week, the Pharisees had a problem with the man carrying the mat, which progressed into their issue with Jesus, because Jesus ultimately demanded he take up his mat, and he had healed him on the Sabbath. Here, their problem is that he healed him on the Sabbath. This blind man isn't carrying anything. Now, instead of interrogating Jesus, they interrogate this man. And that is something we will get to, at least, God willing anyway. We'll address it somewhat here briefly, but we must discuss the Sabbath. As we know, in creation, God made all things. The heavens and the earth were made in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. That does not mean he ceased any and all activity. God, in his intrinsic being, is never inert. He's always moving. He's always acting. However, he, even in the commandments, says, the Sabbath is holy. I have sanctified it. Keep it holy. Make it be holy. Rest on the seventh day. Now, I want to be as brief as I can here. Okay? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. This is what Jesus says. The Sabbath is a gift by God, really pointing to the rest to come. Our future and eternal rest, which Christ has procured, which is why now we have the Lord's Day, which is why now our Sabbath, the Christian Sabbath, as it were, is the Lord's Day, the beginning of the week. This rest has been accomplished. The Sabbath has been accomplished by the Lord of the Sabbath. This is what Jesus refers to himself as the Lord of the Sabbath. So he is the Lord of rest, true rest. And this is why he's coming to this man born blind. This man born blind was absolutely restless, trying to feel his way about, trying to listen to any clue for his next step. So sensitive because of his blindness. And Jesus Christ not only gives him sight, but lifts him into absolute peace, into absolute eternal tranquility, absolute and eternal rest. Abiding and living and loving our God in true rest, in true satisfaction. Still in labor, but in righteous labor, in benevolent labor, in wonderful labor to the cause of glorifying God. So, that's all I want to say about the Sabbath. There's much more to be said. It's very controversial. And so early on, just so you know, the church began to have a problem with the Christians who continued celebrating the Sabbath. Essentially, just come to church on Sunday. And the synagogues were essentially trying to get it to where the Christians wouldn't come on the Sabbath either. Just go to church and so forth. And early church fathers seem to indicate that we shouldn't be keeping the Sabbath. I think given the context, that's not at all what they were saying. So there's much we can say, but we don't have the time to get into this. Let us just remember that the Sabbath, the reason this is an important deal is because God has sanctified it. So it's absolutely understandable for the Pharisees, for the religious authorities to have any problem with somebody breaking the Sabbath. This is a sacred day here, given over to rest to glorify God. This is what God has commanded, so this is good, this is right, and this is what should be done. However, healing on the Sabbath, it's not a sin. It's not breaking the Sabbath. As Jesus says, which one of you, if you were to lose your sheep in a ditch, wouldn't go and fetch him? Does that not work? You're going to help your sheep. But here I am, the good shepherd, and you're not allowing me to bring them into my fold. After this chapter is where he goes on to talk about himself as the good shepherd. So I hope you see the progression going on here, okay? Because most of chapter 9 has to do with the testimony from this man to the religious authorities. And then very, very short is the ending of chapter 9 where Jesus answers the Jews, and then that goes into the discourse of the shepherd and the sheep. So, then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. Now we will see they continue to ask him how his sight became. Okay, how his sight came, how he was given sight. Okay, this is a big question for them because was it this kneading of the clay? Ultimately, this man must be a sinner, therefore. This man therefore must be a sinner. And the other side of the Pharisaical debate was this man can't be a sinner. Just like Nicodemus, nobody could do what this man is doing unless God had sent him. So there's a dispute within the Pharisees on account of this healing, but that comes after this. But essentially, they continue to ask him how he received his sight. He said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath, according to our law, according to our traditions." And let us recognize this is not just a Jewish perspective here, okay? We all, mankind, we're never satisfied with the truth that manifests from God himself. We always want to build ourselves a tower which reaches to the heaven, until God confuses our language. We all want to build our own edifices, our own rules and regulations. And so they're accusing Jesus. This man doesn't keep the Sabbath that we have made, okay? But they see it as God has made, which he did, but they have added to, and their adding to has caused their perception of Jesus not keeping the Sabbath. So this man must be a sinner. And then others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" There was a division among them. So there's a dispute among these religious authorities. One side saying, there's no way this man cannot have come from God because he's a sinner. He broke the Sabbath. And then others are saying, how could he be a sinner? God would never allow a sinner to give sight to a man born blind. The Bible, and as we've mentioned, the signs, the miracles that Jesus does, in particular in the Gospel of John, are signs. They're signs. They're to attest to what he's saying and to who he is. But the Bible warns not to trust in signs and wonders. Jesus even warns the people. This generation will only believe if they see signs and wonders. And he even says, if you can't believe me for what I say, but at least believe me for what I do. This can at least be the beginning. But that's backwards, essentially. What we see is Jesus is the true manifestation of the Son of God incarnate, in the flesh. And he is restoring, he is given sight. He's giving sight to all fallen creatures who are now born blind, in the flesh. But this dispute, essentially, one side is saying, this is impossible. This is impossible. I don't know. How did he heal you? How did this man give you your sight? This is impossible. This man cannot have come from God because he's a sinner. The other side, he obviously is given his sight, okay? But, therefore, he can't have been a sinner. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? What's your testimony? You're the one who was born blind, and you're the one who was healed. We can't agree amongst ourselves. So, you're not a learned man. You're not a religious authority, but what do you say about him? What do you say about him? Knowing that there's a great fear of being kicked out of the Jews. Out of the synagogue, okay, which he is, and which his parents are afraid of, okay, which we'll get to most likely, God willing, next week. However, they ask him, what do you say about him? He said, he is a prophet. Just like the Samaritan woman. Remember initially, I perceive that you are a prophet. Nobody would know these things unless he were a prophet. Tell me, where are we to worship? We believe it's on Mount Gerizim. Y'all believe it's meant to be on Mount Zion. Where are we supposed to worship? And Jesus answered, surely, day is coming and now is, where we must only worship in spirit and in truth. She says, I know the Messiah is coming and he will answer all these questions. I don't know if I'm entirely satisfied with that answer, but it makes sense. But I'm looking forward to a greater answer. Looking forward to the Messiah to come and teach us all things. And he says, I, who am speaking to you, am he. But before that, she just thought he was a prophet. The progression of salvation. The progression of salvation. First, he was just a man called Jesus. Then, to his neighbors, he was a man called Jesus who healed him, put this clay and so forth on his eyes. Then to the religious authorities, this man put clay on my eyes. We can't agree. And this has to be marvelous to him. Not, kind of confusing, not stupendous, but confusing. These are the religious authorities. These are the ones who know the law. And they can't agree on themselves. This man healed me. This man healed me. I don't know why y'all are disputing whether or not he's a sinner. He will later say, I don't know whether he's a sinner. All I know is I once was blind and now I see. That's all I know, right? I'm not as proficient with the law as you are. I didn't go to Pharisaic school, okay? I didn't go to these academies of higher learning. All I know is at this time, he is a prophet. This man came back seeing, and this man's sight is becoming more and more manifest, more and more. But with this dispute, with his dialogue with the Pharisees, it progresses. But even here, he's confessing that he is a prophet. And then finally, when Jesus had heard that they had cast him out, which means literally that he was cast out of the synagogue. Typically, that meant the local synagogue, okay? That doesn't mean he's not allowed to go to the temple. It doesn't mean he's not allowed to go to any other synagogue. Typically, is just a local synagogue. However, when Jesus heard that they had cast him out, when he had found him, he said to him, do you believe in the Son of Man? Do you believe in the Son of Man? Son of Man comes for judgment. Son of Man is depicted very much in Daniel, specifically Daniel chapter 7. So if you want to know more about this Son of Man, that's a good place to begin. So, now the Son of Man comes for judgment, though. He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe him? Now this Lord is really Sir. Okay? Who is he, Sir, that I may believe him? You are the prophet. You are a prophet. So who is he, Sir? I will trust in your word because I know you're a prophet. And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him. You have both seen him. You've now seen him. You didn't see me before. You didn't know me before. And I was just a man called Jesus, and I was just a prophet. You've both seen him. Now you see him truly. You've both seen him with your eyes. And now, by the Spirit of God who is now indwelling you, you've both seen him, and it is he who is talking to you. And much like Thomas at the end of this gospel, he said, Lord This one truly is Kyrios, Lord. Now he believes. I believe. And he worshipped him. My God and my Lord, just as doubting Thomas, when Christ tells him to feel the wounds on his hands, to stick his finger in his side, my God, my Lord, and he dropped and worshipped Jesus. This man who was blind to worshiping Jesus, blind to the true Messiah, to the light of the world. He was blind to any light of the world, but in particular, the true light of the world. He was blinded. He was blinded. And even through his testimony to the Jews, to the religious authorities, he's somewhat blinded. He's given sight. He's given sight, some perception into who Jesus is, slightly. He's a prophet. Many people see Jesus as a great moral teacher. He must have been a prophet. Many people will admit Jesus as a prophet. And that is all. This man will believe him because he's a prophet. But that blindness, the absolute blindness, those scales, as it were, fall away. Remember when Saul on the road of Damascus is blinded, and then once he's healed, scales fall from his eyes. These scales are entirely removed from this man on account of the sovereign will of God through his Son. Again, this man didn't ask for sight. He was imploring God all the time. Why? Most likely never asking, never hoping. How would he have any hope of being given sight? This has never been done. This has never been done. So his question is usually, why? Why? And then Christ comes out of nowhere and chooses this man, just as he chooses every one of us. So, as we continue this chapter, next week, God willing, let us embrace the light of the world. We were born in absolute darkness. He gives us eternal light. Now, that light can seem dim at times. And that is why we are also looking at the book of Job. And so we will get into that a little bit more in our next session, which is about to take place regarding the book of Job. So this light, this refulgence, sometimes seems dim. But let us all be encouraged and embrace the fact that once we were blind, and now we see. Sometimes it can seem hazy, it can seem foggy, it can seem blurry. Sometimes it feels like he doesn't hear us. Sometimes it feels like we can't hear him, and we can't see him, and we can't see his glory, and we're blind once again. Let's realize and remember that is not true. Once we were blind, but now we see. During the time of this seeming darkness, the light of the world is always the light of the world. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. Cry. And when that's not enough and you don't hear an answer, cry all the more. Tearfully. Scream aloud. Do not play the hypocrite. Make your true heart known. Pour out your heart to God. Man and women can only help you so much. You can only help yourself so much. This self-help idea is nonsense. The only one who can bring you true light is the true light of the world, who is the light of heaven, who is the refulgence and the glory we will all enjoy in the world to come. Praise God. Let's pray.